Welcome back to Prime Time. We're now turning our attention to special economic zones. They're one of Zimbabwe's key economic reform strategies. But beyond policy, what's actually happening on the ground? We'll be unpacking whether special economic zones have truly delivered on the promise to attract investment, drive industrial growth, and boost exports, or whether there's still a gap between intention and implementation. To help us do that, we're joined by Jephias Makiwa. He's the principal economist at the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce, ZNCC. Jephias, it is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
Fantastic. Now, Jephias, your area of focus is obviously on macroeconomic policy, financial systems, and private sector development. So I think you're the right person to be speaking to, particularly as we look at national competitiveness and regional trade policy.
Yeah, it is an interesting topic indeed, and we look forward to unpacking the issues.
Fantastic. I always like to say that let's not take anything for granted. So very briefly, I suppose to set the scene, special economic zones, we've heard talk about them for over a decade, probably a decade and a half now, as a policy tool that has been talked about in terms of ways in which we can bolster industrial growth, export growth. But in summary, what are they?
Special economic zones. So in the word special economic zones, there is zones. Mm-hmm. So they are designated areas that are in various parts of the country where they are operating under a ring-fenced framework in terms of the fiscal framework, the investment framework, and their role, as you have mentioned, is to do with anchoring industrialization, supporting export-led growth, and also increasing job creation in the country.
Fantastic. So when we look at the Zimbabwean context, how far have we got in terms of implementing this policy measure?
Well, I think the legal framework is there in place. And of course, there have been some changes over the years since the enactment of the Special Economic Zones Act. And we have actually demarcated those areas in Harare. You can talk of Sunway Seat. Mm-hmm. In Blawa, you can talk of Belmont. Mm-hmm. And then we have others like in Victoria Falls as a tourism economic zone. So in terms of the areas themselves, the physical or geographical areas, they are there in place. But in terms of the infrastructure now in those zones or demarcated areas, we are still lagging behind as a country compared to other countries.
What, in your view, I suppose it will help us to answer why we're lagging, because I think that's the key question that we're trying to sort of address. We've set up or we've designated a place in special economic zone. Is it enough to just say this is now a special economic zone, or there are other things that we must then put in place to ensure that it lives up to being that?
Yeah, so you'd see that just demarcating an area as a special economic zone is necessary, but not a sufficient conditions to ensure that we start to have economic activities happening in those places. So you can look at the areas that are demarcated as special economic zones like Sunway City. The private sector has interest in investing in those sectors or in those areas, but what's lacking has been the infrastructure. Of course, the incentive framework as put forward in the Act is quite clear, and it's also beneficial for investors. But what has been lacking is infrastructure. When talk of road infrastructure, transport infrastructure, water, and also energy, and also maybe ICT infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So you need that enabling infrastructure in place to ensure that the policy intent would then move into execution and formidable results in line with the vision.
We'll come back to the incentives, but just following up on this issue of infrastructure you've mentioned, who then should lead? Ideally, I would imagine it is the government itself that must put in place then the infrastructure. But some of these infrastructure items, for instance, ICT, are also private sector issues where they should perhaps lead. And so, in your view, who should be taking the lead in terms of implementing or putting these some of this infrastructure in place?
Okay, I think the current framework allows for a government-led infrastructure development process, and also a private sector-led infrastructure development process, and also a partnership under the Triple Ps arrangement. And you'd see that the government is special economic zones that it manages solely, and then there are some special economic zones that it manages in partnership with the private sector. So I think a partnership is a more desirable approach to developing this infrastructure we are talking about. If you talk of ICT, of course, there are government-owned companies like Tel1, like your Net1, which are in the digital space. But there's also other players like Econet, Liquid Intelligence Communication. So those companies, they are also playing a role in the development of the infrastructure in those sectors. So a public-private partnership arrangement is the most prevalent form of partnership in terms of developing the infrastructure in the special economic zone.
I want to take you back to the issue of incentives that you've spoken about. You've obviously mentioned that there is an act that speaks to this. I would imagine that some of those incentives differ based on where the SEZ is and things like that. But in general, from where you're sitting as an economist, but also your engagement with the private sector at ZNCC, are those incentives adequate?
Well, there have been issues. If you look at the uptake of the special economic zones themselves, given the incentive structure, there has been low uptake, preferably, or you can say attributable to the incentive structure itself. You can look at first, before 2025, there was a 100% export orientation. So if you are operating in a special economic zone, you have to be exporting 100% of your output. So that in itself was a deterrent to a potential investor in a special economic zone, in that when you look at export markets, they are deemed to be more riskier than when you're selling domestically. So investors would then look at, say, how competitive is the country when you then try to enter into foreign markets. And Zimbabwe in general has been lowly competitive when you enter into foreign markets. And then when you look at also the incentive framework to say zero-rated tax, corporate income tax in the first 5 years. And when you look at some of the projects in the manufacturing sector, you'd see that some would have longer payback periods or gestation periods. So in that itself would then be not attractive as such when you then compare with other countries that have longer tax holidays. You can talk of countries like Ethiopia, they range from 2 to 15 years, depending on the sector and also the project type. So those incentives were not really attractive to a private investor. But there are other incentives that will then cut across, like duty-free importation of raw materials, inputs, equipment, and machinery. You can talk of withholding tax exemptions on non-residents' income, among other incentives.
Now, as you've quite rightly said, some of the investors have not responded to those incentives as they are in place. So I would want us to, perhaps if we are able to, highlight some of the places where we said, look, okay, this special economic zone has actually succeeded or is on a trajectory where it will yield the desired results.
I think Victoria Falls is a tourism special economic zone. Is one that I would say it has been a success. You see that the private sector is actually coming through, building new hotels, sporting facilities. They are coming on board. I would say that could be one of the success stories that we can tell as a country. But the rest, as I mentioned at the beginning, that the issues to do with infrastructure. So when an investor is thinking of coming and investing in a special economic zone, you are looking at the upfront cost that you put in place. So if you are coming through to develop the infrastructure from road, water, ICT, that means that your initial capital outlay
It's much, yeah.
is much higher than anticipated.
Yeah.
So you are then forced to scale down or to delay the investment. So I think once we sort out the infrastructure side of the special economic zones, then I think we can start to see more traction in terms of investments coming through.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned Victoria Falls, because in my mind I was just thinking to myself that the natural resource that's there, the natural wonder itself lends itself so well that, almost as you talk about infrastructure, it's already there, and it's made it much easier. So I think in a way, that's why it's been such a success. In your view, what needs to be done? Obviously, we need to address issues of infrastructure, perhaps address issues of incentives, but what else could be done to address some of these challenges that you highlight?
Okay, outside of the infrastructure, you are also looking at policy consistency. So as a country, I think in terms of policy stability, we have been lacking in the previous years. And you'd see that we have actually changed the incentive framework almost on a yearly basis. So when an investor is looking to come into invest in a special economic zone, they are looking into the predictability of the legislative and incentive framework. So just in 2025, as by the 2025 national budget statement, there have been changes to say that we are moving from the zero-rated corporate income tax rate for the first 5 years to a 15% corporate income tax rate per year from the first year of operations. And we have also changed in terms of the withholding tax to 10%. That is lower than the withholding tax that applies to the rest of the economy. So in that itself, we are saying that there is no really stability in terms of the incentive framework. It continuously changes. And
are those changes not a response, though, to what the market is saying or business is saying?
Yeah, it could be that the market is saying this current structure is not working. Let's change to a better and improved structure. But when it changes on a regular basis, it means that there's no stability in terms of the policy framework. And outside of the policy framework, you are also looking at the monetary policy aspects in terms of the currency regime. Those are the things that have to do with the overall investment climate in the country, so to speak.
You mentioned currency. In a way, I suppose, not yet put down in paper or on paper in terms of law, but clearly what we are seeing is an indication now that the currency regime shall remain as it is until certain conditions precedent have been met. So the 2030 deadline is, we are told, is no longer an issue, although it's yet to be put down on paper. But that currency issue, the fact that we use the US dollar, and we might be on that in that regime for quite some time until things obviously stabilize, is that not a plus? Is that not something that we've done right that could then be give us that impetus?
Yeah, so the issue that it has not been put in paper, it would mean that investors will be
still weary
on the sidelines. But of course, as part of the incentive framework under the Special Economic Zones Act, has to do with being able to pay your workers in foreign currency, and also being given preferential in terms of repatriating of profits and dividends as an investor in special economic zones. So there is a guarantee from the part of government that if you invest in special economic zones, then you won't face any difficulties when you need foreign currency or when you need to repatriate your funds, let's say dividends or profits. But the removal of the deadline itself would mean that the exclusive use of the local currency can happen even in the next few weeks, or can happen even after 2030. So that in itself is another area that raises uncertainty for an investor.
All right. You made mention of Ethiopia a bit earlier. Obviously, it's good to benchmark and see what others are doing well and perhaps lessons that we could learn. Countries like Rwanda, countries like Mauritius. I know Zambia is also quite aggressively trying to push special economic zones. They come to mind. What are some of the things that, could they have experienced some of the teething challenges that we've gone through, and how have they gotten around that? What are some of the lessons we could learn from these countries?
Okay, I think for countries like Mauritius, as an example, you'd see that they do have a consistent or a predictable policy framework as a starting point. You can look at their corporate income tax rate, which is now almost similar to what has been proposed in the 2025 National Budget Statement, where the highest tax rate in Mauritius is about 15%. And for us, we are saying that if you invest in a special economic zone, the corporate income tax rate applicable is 15% throughout the years of operation. So that's quite a plus, in that we are aligning with our regional competitors. But if you look at then countries like Rwanda, you've seen that they've actually seriously invested in infrastructure. As an investor, you just come in and set up your plant.
Plug and play.
Exactly, the plug and play model that has been adopted. And if you look at Ethiopia, you'd see that the utilities are available, electricity, water, they are available actually at subsidized rates. And for us now, when you look at our own situation, those utilities are the missing link in that infrastructure. So we need to expedite the development or investment in terms of infrastructure in our special economic zones.
How do you, as you were speaking, I was just thinking to myself, obviously we are giving away these incentives, well, not giving, but we are presenting these incentives, offering these incentives, tax holidays and things like that. In a market such as ours, where we have a shrinking tax base already, we have a revenue authority that's obviously trying to generate as much income or revenue as it can, versus giving tax holidays and those sort of tax incentives. That's a tough balancing act. Is there appetite for the revenue authority to offer that? Can we afford it, in other words? Will it make sense?
I think the recent revision, as I mentioned, the 2025 National Budget Statement, saying we're revising the corporate income tax matrix to say it's now 15% per annum. I think it's one of the measures that was trying then to balance revenue and also attracting investment. So from the tax framework, as you see it, it's more like taxing for revenue rather than growth. So in the short term, if we forego, like when you say no corporate income tax, or say 0% corporate income tax rate in the first 5 years, it means you have forgone revenue as part of the government. But in the long term, you'd see that as we get more and more investment, it will be actually more beneficial to the government and to the economy in general in terms of revenue generation and also investment attraction and also job creation, export growth. You'd see that it's beneficial in the long run. But in the short term, there's always that trade-off that you're foregoing revenue so that you can have long-term investment in place.
As we head towards wrapping up, I'd like to just understand, as a chamber of commerce, what are you doing to sort of push for investments, push for these special economic zones to perform?
Okay, as the Chamber of Commerce, our core mandate is that of lobbying and advocacy. So when you look at the incentive framework, we have been pushing in various areas, like the reduction in terms of 100% export orientation to about 80%. The Chamber has been pushing in our previous submissions to the Minister of Finance, Economic Development and Investment Promotion. And we also serve as a feedback mechanism between the government and the private sector, in that through those lobbying and advocacy efforts, we talk to the investor, we talk to the players that are already invested in those sectors what are the issues, what needs to be addressed, and then we approach the government in terms of what needs to be done. And recently, through ZIDA, the government launched the Business Knowledge Process Outsourcing, BKPO, BPO, where now the services sector have now been recognized as part of the special economic zones. A building like Joiner City is now a special economic zone, and they are in the process of identifying other buildings in various other cities, or even in Harare itself, where those buildings can be demarcated as special economic zones. So these are the efforts that would materialize through the efforts by the chamber.
So what it therefore means is, and this is for me as a layman and people who are listening, if I then go and set up shop in Joiner City, I benefit from all the other benefits that are attendant to being a member of a special economic zone?
Yes, exactly. But you have to be in the sectors
that are demarcated.
Yes.
Fantastic. Got that. Very lastly, I mean, we've been talking about special economic zones as a nation, as I said, for quite some time now. Obviously, we've identified that there are some challenges that are hampering, that are hindering, and the success has perhaps not been to the level we would like. Going forward, and given some of the measures, the reforms that are being proposed, that are being put in place, how would you measure success, say, 4 or 5 years from now?
Okay, I would measure success in terms of, because there are objectives that were set in coming out with these special economic zones. We talked about decent employment creation, export-led growth, investment attraction. So when you look at those metrics currently, if you look at manufactured exports as a percentage of total mechanized exports, they're about 7.5%. So in the next 3 to 5 years, if we are saying that we have succeeded in terms of the special economic zones, we should look at least a 20% increase in manufactured exports from the current figures. And when you look at employment creation, we say maybe if we can have at least a 10% increase also in employment creation. And in terms of investment contribution to GDP, currently we are talking of roughly about 8% investment contribution to GDP. And then when you compare it to other countries, you'd see the average is around 22 to 25% investment contribution to GDP as a percentage. So if we can increase that to around 14-15%, I would state that as a success.
Fantastic. Jephias Makiwa, Principal Economist for the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce. It's been a pleasure speaking to you here on Prime Time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Fantastic. And that does it. I've been speaking to Jephias Makiwa, Principal Economist, ZNCC. We've been discussing special economic zones on Prime Time ZW, an effort brought to you by the Business Times. Be sure to join us again next time.